process of change is really a mystery. Very little is known about change. As a hypnotherapist, I've been excited and delighted to simply be part of the change process, to work with people and help them to mobilize their energy and to gain a position of perception that they can use their creative intelligence to affect change. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How are you all today?
Wonderful. How are you?
Well, I'm wonderful, and thank you. And this is an exciting moment. It's exciting for you, I know, because you've used your power of decision, you've overcome the natural tendency to procrastinate, and you've decided to explore your potential for change. It's exciting for me because this is what I most enjoy doing. As I said a moment ago, the excitement, the thrilling possibilities that exist for me as being part of the process of change always bring me to a wonderful pitch of excitement. And beyond that, some of my very best friends, people I've known for many years now, are people I met in just this way in the beginning of a new class. And I hear people say, I've lost my confidence, I never had any confidence, I need to gain confidence, and all of those statements are false. You see, you came into this world with great confidence. You had a lot of equipment, and when you wanted something, if your diaper were wet or you were hungry, you made a loud noise till someone came and took care of it. And interestingly enough, I'm sure you know people who go through life and never learn any other method for filling their needs. Just keep making a loud noise and hope someone will come and take care of it. That's called manipulating the environment. Perfectly appropriate when you're lying there in the crib because you haven't yet developed the strength and power within yourself to fill your needs in any measure. But every one of you has a great deal of confidence. Because you say to me, I just can't seem to be relaxed when I take an examination. I tense up. The very things I've studied seem to just not be available in my memory. I don't know what it is. And you have great confidence that that's the way you're going to behave when you take an examination. How many of you have said, I have a terrible memory for names and faces? Raise your hand. And you have great confidence in that because you've said it thousands of times. Now I'm going to give you, since this is a college, it's appropriate to give a little quiz, a test. This is multiple choice. Every time you say or think, I have a terrible memory for names or faces, which of the following results take place? One, that the thought or statement tremendously improves your ability to remember names and faces. Two, it doesn't have any effect because it's only words and thoughts, and what do they mean anyway? And three, each time you think, I have a terrible memory for names and faces, it further inhibits your ability to remember names and faces. What's the correct answer? You all get an A in that test. And yet, we all have great confidence that in a meaningful relationship, we're going to be rejected sooner or later because we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we're unlovable. We know in a given situation we're going to make a fool of ourselves. When I stand in class to recite, I'm going to say the wrong thing and everyone's going to laugh at me. I know that that's so because it happened to me in the second grade. And when the teacher told me to spell cat, I went, and sure enough, everyone laughed. And I've been holding it right here ever since. And I made up my mind that I'm never going to stand up again and give them that chance to humiliate and embarrass me. And so now I'm 22 years old, but I'm still avoiding that speaking to a group, speaking in public. So our concern then is, where is your confidence invested? Because we're going to deal with the liberation of energy and the transformation of energy. We must first liberate it from places where it's crystallized and acting to affect you in a way that causes your behavior to be counterproductive, unsatisfying, frustrating. What is behavior? Well, behavior is simply the expression of energy. For a long time, the scientific view was that the universe was made up of two elements, of matter and energy. And then along came a man, and he said, no, that's not quite the right view, because there is no such thing as matter. There is only energy. His name was Albert Einstein. And what he communicated to us, that although our finite senses might not perceive it, that all objects, material objects, that appear to us to be lacking in energy, if we could penetrate down into the very nucleus of the cells that make up that matter, we would find energy and movement. You met a few moments ago Jack from London, and last Sunday we took Jack down to Southern California's great tourist attraction, Disneyland. And you've all been, I'm sure, to that spectacle where you ride through and the snowflake keeps shrinking, or you keep going deeper and deeper. What's the name of that? That's the sponsor. All right, you know what I'm talking about. And when Jack came out of there, she said, well, that's really incredible just to think about the fact that there are worlds within worlds within worlds. So energy is the basis for our behavior, because we release energy in a specific way in a given situation, and that's our behavior in that situation. Now, much of our behavior is habitual, the habits, so to speak. And that's okay, provided the behavior is satisfying. We get up each morning and we brush our teeth, and that's okay. Back then, as a young child, many times we just wet the brush and hung it up in case Mother would come in and feel it. But now, as adults, we behave as adults because we want to care for our teeth so that we might have them for a longer period of time. So the way we behave in a given situation is what we call the expression of energy. Now, how does that energy acquire its character? In short, what makes us behave in a given situation, in a given way, the same way every time, even though we've come to recognize that that behavior is unsatisfying, non-productive, counterproductive. Here's a man who, each year, his mother-in-law comes to visit. And about the second day, he explodes toward his mother-in-law and kind of tells her off, if you will. And that antagonizes his wife. And so for 2 weeks after the mother-in-law leaves, she doesn't even talk to him. And each year he vows, next year when she comes for her visit, I'm just not going to let her get under my skin. And now she's here, and it's into that second day, and you know what happens. He goes up and spoke again. And he says, why do I let her get to me like that? I know better. I know the price I have to pay. That's compulsive behavior. That's habitual response to a stimulus, whatever it is that he's responding to in that way to his mother-in-law. How does the energy acquire its character that causes him to behave like that, instead of in the way that he intellectually determines he would like to behave? Well, from the fixed ideas that are held in the deeper level of the mind, what I refer to as the subconscious mind. Those ideas, fixed ideas, are acquired very early. They don't have to be as a result of a trauma. Quite often, they're simply the interpretation of our experience. And the kind of programming that we get. Example, when a parent says to a child, why are you so bad? That's a question and a statement. You are so bad, tell me why. Well, what's the child's answer? I don't know. That's called an attribution. The parent attributes an innate, states it as an innate characteristic of the child. The parent being the authority figure, how do you argue against that? Now, it may not be, why are you so bad? But as we get into school, it's, why do you always have so much trouble with spelling? Both your father and I have helped you with the spelling. And you just seem to... Why do you have so much trouble? Is you have trouble with spelling. Tell me why. And that develops a pattern. And so now people come to me, the hypnotherapist, and they say, one of my problems is I'm the world's worst speller. I've always been a terrible speller. As if somehow, in the divine plan, they were hurled into this world with a little part of their brain that said, bad speller for the rest of their life. You see. And you know that's not the way it occurs. So these fixed ideas give the character to our behavior. And those ideas essentially are ideas which have come together to form concepts, which have merged together to form attitudes. So we can say our ideas and attitudes about ourselves, the world around us, and the way that we relate to the world around us. Some refer to that as the self-image. The way that we see ourselves. I like the word perception. When we make a discovery about ourselves or the world, we say, I see. That's perception. That's altered perception. That's a discovery, a mini satori, a small awakening. A great psychologist, the Apostle Paul, said, as a child, I saw through a glass darkly. I thought as a child. I spake as a child. As a man, I see clearly. I put aside childish things. And I interpret that to mean that as my perception is altered, as my awareness increases, I alter, amend, or replace childhood and childish ideas that were appropriate for me then, but are not appropriate for me now. I had a threatening and punitive parent who said, open your mouth and I'll knock you over. So I learned to be passive, or I learned to be defiant. I see with defiance, and now I have to defy all the time, or I have to be passive all the time. That's the belief. It suited the child because to be other than passive and submissive was very threatening. It does not suit the adult because they are exploited. People recognize their unwillingness to assert, to be aggressive, to say, I am not willing to be treated in that manner. The subconscious mind has two major movements. The movement away from pain, that's the strongest movement because it's linked to the survival mechanism, and the movement toward pleasure. Now, when we see people staying with mental, physical, or emotional pain, and that means, in this context, staying in situations that are very, very painful, we say they've developed a conditioned tolerance to pain. And that tolerance has a clinical title. We call it masochism, which overrules that natural tendency to move away from pain. And that masochism develops through experiences earlier in our life. That we interpreted in a certain way, that feeling led to certain thoughts, and the thoughts led to certain forms of behavior in specific situations. And so today, as we continue to behave in that way, and when the client comes to the hypnotherapist and says, I always have a problem, Well, just a few weeks ago, I worked with a woman, a very lovely young woman, and she said, I'm very relaxed and expressive when I'm with a man that I'm not too excited about. She said, but if I happen to meet someone that I feel I could really get very involved with, I'm tense, I'm anxious, I'm nervous, I'm fearful. I wind up breaking off the relationship before it has a chance to get started. Well, what's happening? She says, so long as I know I'm in charge and I can reject that other person without feeling upset, then I can be comfortable. But where my emotions and my feelings begin to be concerned, and I know that I will become vulnerable, concerned about, will this person hold me in high regard? Will they love me? Will they want to make a commitment toward me, a long-term commitment? Then I become anxious because I'm afraid of making contact with the unspeakable truth that they believe about themselves. What is that? I am unlovable. Again, the interpretation of those early experiences. Now, parents don't realize how they're programming a child, and even very young infants, young children. Mothers visiting at a friend's house, talking about married life to her friend, and Jimmy's in the terrible twos, and he's moving around and working and exploring and discovering that he can manipulate things. And mother says, he's such a bad boy. Now, she's saying it tongue-in-cheek. She's such a bad boy. Why, he drives me crazy all the time. He is so naughty. He's hearing all of that, of course. And now he has to confirm it. Aren't you a naughty boy? You see, again, that attribution. An English psychiatrist, R.D. Laing, many of you I'm sure are familiar with his writings, in his classic book, The Politics of the Family, there's a chapter called The Family Scenario. And there's this thought that's so powerful. He says, the clinical hypnotist often knows what he is doing. The family hypnotist rarely does. Because it's the same process. It is developing ideas that become emotionalized because of the kind of ideas that they are. Incorporating them into what is called a self-image. Before we have developed a critical faculty, that critical factor of the conscious mind which evaluates incoming ideas in terms of our previous experiences, our knowledge, and our interpretation of our experiences. And we're told that's not fully operational until about age 11. And so before we have a critical faculty to screen these ideas, we're accepting them. Now, there are only a few ways that stimulate the acceptance of ideas. Why do we accept some ideas and reject others? Well, here are the principles involved. We're much more likely to accept an idea at a subconscious level and have it become fixed when it's presented by an authority figure. Who's an authority figure? Anyone that we consider to be smarter or more powerful than we are. Doesn't have to be anyone older or better educated. An emotional relationship. That's how friends influence each other. Any idea that's accompanied by strong feeling, emotion, is much more likely to be accepted at a subconscious level. Emotion is to the mind as light is to the camera. It sensitizes and opens up and allows that image to become fixed. And so any idea, can be any kind of emotion. Doesn't have to be negative emotion, you see. You can create and engender positive and powerful ideas in a very emotional way. Now it's interesting, here as we stand in college, some of you might remember this kind of a scene as you went along through your school years. It's time to present the report card. And there are two essential reactions. One goes like this. Well, you got a B in English. Well, that's good. And a C in mathematics and so on. Oh, no. D in government history. I don't think that's a subject, but just hold it out. How is it you got D again? You've never gotten... You promised last time that you were going to work harder in that class. And here's an F in biology. I helped you with that term paper. And you see, all the energy is on the lower marks. Nobody says, wow, you got B again in English. God bless you. I was always so dumb in English, and I'm thrilled and happy and excited to see that you're doing so well. That's grand. You see. Now, on the other hand, there are parents who do celebrate the positive achievements. But it seems as if the emotional energy is attached to what you don't do, what you're having difficulty doing, what you're failing to do. And that fixes the ideas. And so we tend not to place very much importance to our achievements because they've never been emotionalized. They don't have a great value to us in our subconscious mind. So any idea that has strong feeling attached to it is much more likely to become fixed in the subconscious mind. Now, as a child, the feeling, of course, is the disapproval that's expressed. Because to the child, the disapproval is interpreted as loss of approval is a loss of love, or represents a loss of love. And as children, we're very dependent upon our parents for those feelings of acceptance, approval, affection, and love. And it creates great anxiety to experience that disapproval because of its implied meaning. And I've never met anyone that's interested in losing love. We're all interested in gaining love, feeling more lovable, and expressing more love with the confidence that what we have to express as loving energy is nourishing and welcomed by those that we're directing it to. The third principle is any idea that is experienced repetitiously, that's self-explanatory, is much more likely to be accepted. In the adult mind, new ideas have great difficulty being accepted. The reason is we now have a great storehouse of ideas and interpretations. That's that critical factor of the conscious mind. Examines these incoming ideas critically. The first step in the examination of an incoming idea is to link the idea to something that we have previously experienced, analyzed, worked with. And if we can't, we dismiss it. That's why you're all discovering that it's very difficult for the adult mind to accept new ideas the first time or times that we're exposed to them. But through the conditioning process of repetition, those ideas lose their newness, we can focus more on them, and we begin to process and accept them. So it's the conditioning factor of repetition. Then the fourth factor is reinforcement from a variety of sources. Multiple sources of reinforcement. And what does that mean? Just what it says. If an idea is presented by your parent, reinforced by your friends and your teacher, for example, if you're an honest person and you believe that honesty is the best policy, whether you believe it for whether the basis of your belief is religious or ethical, it's quite likely that somewhere in your background that idea became fixed. And it became fixed through the reinforcement. Your parents in the home, your family and relatives, church, and other forms of programming. And so now that it's fixed, if you do something dishonest, you experience a flow of energy that tells you you have worked against a fixed idea. What is that energy that gives you that message? What do you call it? A feeling of guilt. If you didn't have the fixed idea, then you wouldn't feel guilty when you violated, would you? You see. And that leads to a little understanding as to why we have habitual criminals. The rate of recidivism, return to prison by those who have been in prison and released, is so high. It runs up it has for many, many years. In the 84, 85% of the people, the felons who serve time in the penitentiary, go back. And many of them are termed constitutional psychopathic inferiors, is the psychiatric term. And it simply means they fail to learn from their experiences. They fail to learn that criminal activity is most likely to result in serious consequences. But we could say it in another way and say they're experiencing little or no guilt. Therefore, that idea is not as likely that honesty is the best policy to be fixed. You see? How can an assassin, what is referred to as a hitman, stalk someone they don't even know, they're doing this for money, kill them, go off then, eat a spaghetti dinner, and crawl into bed and go off to sleep? They don't have the least pang of guilt. That same explanation, you see. They don't have a fixed idea that what they're doing violates an important spiritual principle. So the multiple reinforcement of ideas. And then finally, number 5, an idea is much more likely to be accepted at a subconscious level when it is linked to a significant emotional factor. What can that be? It can be a person. You're just like your mother or your father, whatever, or your Uncle Charlie. He was never any good either. He was always a lazy bum. You're just as lazy as he was. Now, quite often that's a problem because you're just like your father. Well, you may have very loving feelings for your father. And, of course, every person is made up of strengths and weaknesses. And when that's hurled at you, it's always in terms of the weakness. You're just like your father. He's never been able to be on time all of his life. And because of the positive feelings connected with that person, you're much more likely to accept it. That's an emotional identification. Now, it could be a family member. All the women in our family suffer from migraine. My grandmother had them. My mother had them. And I have them. And what's the implications of 2 little girls playing on the floor? And you're going to have them because you're female, you see. Now, I don't mean to pose as a medical authority, but my experience shows great evidence that things like migraine headache are passed along in just that way. It can be ethnic. I can't help it that I have such rages, jealous rages. All Italians are that way about their women. See? Sure, I drink a little too much, but I'm Irish and it's in the genes. That's an idea that can become fixed because of its identification. Now, let's put all of that together in one case, and we'll show you how a person became the world's worst speller, in their opinion. It's in the 2nd grade, and remember, this little fella called upon to stand up. Johnny spelled cat, and everyone laughs. And now he doesn't realize they laughed because it was the way they were discharging their tension. They were so glad it wasn't that they weren't the ones standing there with their mind going blank. And so now the first decision is that he can't spell. And so the next day a little spelling test is given, a little strip of yellow paper, say 7 or 8 simple words, and he misspells all of them. Now he brings that paper home with 0 on the top and shows it to his dad. His dad was an immigrant who didn't have much education, had to work in difficult manual labor, and he's very concerned now that his boy get an education and have a better lot in life than he has had. And so his dad looks at him and says, "Why can't you spell? What's wrong with you?" And so he says, "All right, you're going to learn to spell. I want to see that spelling book, and every night I'm going to give you 3 words. And you're going to stand right here until you spell them. And every time you fail to spell them, I'm going to smack you right across the mouth until you spell it." Now, I want you to think about it for just a moment. Here you are, 7, 8 years old, and you're standing there. I propose that if you were told that if you spelled the word wrong, you'd be smacked across the mouth or punished in some other way, you probably wouldn't be able to spell your own name because of the states of tension existing. And so now, night after night, this sorry scene goes on. And now comes the report card, and it's failing in spelling. Now a little more reinforcement. Older brother comes in and says, "I don't know why you have such trouble in spelling. I never had any trouble in spelling. Your sister never had any trouble in spelling." So that's a little more reinforcement. Soon, now the teacher's got it too. And you'd be surprised as we do these age regressions in hypnosis to find out how many teachers give the same kind of suggestion. You'd be surprised when I discover how someone just 20 years ago was put in the corner, and since they don't have dunce caps as standard issue anymore, wrap a towel around someone's head and have them sit on a stool in the corner because they failed to spell a word. And so now we have that multiple reinforcement, which is also including the process of repetition. There's a lot of emotion connected from the situation. It's coming from authority figures, family members, and teacher. Now we'll add the final step. One day, mother, who's upset by all of this that's going on, she calls the child into the kitchen and gives him a glass of milk and some cookies and said, "Don't be too concerned about this. You're just like me. I never could spell either." The process is now complete. And 40 years later, that person will come to me and say, "I am the world's worst speller. I have never been able to spell, not from the first day that I started school." And you see how that idea became so fixed. And of course, it's the delusion. This is an important point. Everyone reads the newspaper, except that tiny percentage of illiterates that can't read. Everyone reads books and magazines, and therefore everyone can read. Everyone who can read can spell, can interpret the word. How do we know they can spell? Because they can. It appears that they can't when they set out to write. Well, because they're photographing the correct spelling of all of the words that they can't spell every time they read a paper, a book, or a magazine, aren't they? Nod your head like that when I ask those questions. Yeah, that lets me know you're listening. So they have a delusion that they can't spell. And as a therapist, it's my job to penetrate that delusion, to poke holes in it, to undermine it, until finally they can do what? See clearly. And their perception has been changed. Now, as we go back to behavior, what we're concerned with here is a method or methods to alter, amend, or in many cases to replace existing fixed ideas. Why? It's the underlying fixed ideas that give the character to the energy which is expressed as our behavior. Therefore, if we want to change the behavior, we've got to alter the character of the energy, and we can only do that by altering, amending, or replacing existing fixed ideas. Now, I have spoken to you about the parents in the past. And many of you are prone to look back and say, yeah, that's right. Boy, when I think of how my father was so brutal and he beat me up all the time, and my mother was so sarcastic, and they never gave me any approval, and besides, she always loved my brother more. It's no wonder I'm the mess that I am today. I must caution you right at this point as we begin. You must find a way to give up all of the energy that you have mobilized, even paralyzed, back into that kind of resentment and resistance. For that is the very energy that must be liberated so that you can transform it for creative use in your life now. There's a more important reason than that. Every parent did what they did because that was their level of understanding. One woman told me recently, a lady who's a very successful publicist in San Francisco came down and she had a lot of problems. She had been married several times and was currently with a man who she said seemed to be a split personality. A part of it was kind of loving, and then this other part that he even called by a different name brutalized her emotionally and so on. And what she discovered in the first session of hypnotherapy was that her mother, who had been an alcoholic, would beat her viciously, and then after the beating would pick her up in her arms and love her and cry and tell her how much she loved her, and that went on for years. And what became identified in the mind is, if you love me, you'll mistreat me first. You see? That's the connection. And so she's still with that same man, but the difference is that now, after a few sessions, she went back to San Francisco and she told him, no longer is it going to be this way, the way it has been. This is the way it's going to be from now on. And if you don't like the new way, then you have an option. And I have options. You can pack your suitcase and go, and if you hesitate, then I'll pack mine and go. That's a different perception of her existence than she had when she arrived. You see? Because she wasn't aware of those options. It's been said that a neurotic is one who willfully and consistently overlooks existing options. They always say, well, it's got to be this or that. In fact, there's a song that way, it's got to be this or that. So as you look back into your past, you must realize that your parents did the best they could on the basis of their level of understanding and comprehension and view of the world and of themselves. But more importantly, remember what Paul said. As a child, I saw through a glass darkly. I thought as a child. I spake as a child. As a man, I put aside childish things, for I now see clearly. And that means if you now recognize that your behavior is contaminated by fixed ideas that you acquired back there, and other people played a role in that, you must now come to, for some, a painful realization. You must find the ways, the means, the methods to change those ideas and feelings within yourself. You are now your own father, mother, grandpa, uncle. Remember that old Western song a few years back? It said, I am my own grandpa. About marriages and so on. But literally that becomes true in transactional analysis. You were told that you have the parent state, ego state, the adult, and the child. And the parent is the internalization of all the ideas and attitudes and behavior of those authority figures through your life. And that's the way you treat yourself as a parent. And the parent ego state is usually split into the critical parent and the nourishing parent. And most of the people that I work with are so critical of themselves. And if you hesitate in applying that to yourself, just ask yourself, who in all this world would you treat as meanly as you treat yourself? So we have to liberate the energy so that we have invested in the past, so that we can use it creatively in the present to move toward our goals, to overcome our problems. Every one of us remembers a time in our past, perhaps when we were very, very young, when we sprang out of bed 5:30 a.m. and our imagination was excited with our plans for all of the things that we were going to do that day. Why, obstacles just didn't exist. Or if in our imagination we thought of them, we swept them away. Now it's true at that early time, we had little awareness of the resistance of life. But we had then what's been called the most precious gift of the mind, a belief in ourselves. And so you never lost that belief. A rule of physics is you can't create energy, nor can you destroy it. It can only be transformed. And that early belief in yourself that made the day glorious has now been transformed into beliefs that make your days miserable. I'm not a good student, I'm not lovable, and on, all the things we've been talking about. So our thrust here for the next 2 days is to help you to learn the principles and methods that you can take control of this energy so that you can begin to channel it so that it works for you more of the time than it works against you. And as you do that, then you'll begin to move closer to that mystical marriage. And what does that mean? It's a metaphysical term. When your conscious intellect, that part of you that knows what's good, right, satisfying, rewarding, fulfilling, and appropriate for you, when that agrees with what you feel like doing, then you're there. Because the key is we spend our lives doing what we feel like doing, whether or not it's the right thing for us to do. And I'm going to give you some time to dwell on that, because at first it sounds much like a paradox.